So, in this segment, we're going to be talking about how the government paid a middleman, essentially a person who doesn't make or supply PPE, £21 million for his services, and how essentially he has screwed over the government as well. So, a Spanish businessman who acted as a go between to secure protective garments for NHS staff in the coronavirus pandemic was paid $28 million, £21 million in UK taxpayer cash. A consultant had been in line for a further $20 million dollars of UK public funds filed in a US court reveal. The legal papers also reveal how an American supplier of the PPE called the deals lucrative. So this guy is making money. Someone's making a lot of money off this. The Department of Health was asked for a comment but did not respond in time. A legal dispute is playing out in the courts of Miami. Has helped shine a light on the amount of money some companies have made supplying the NHS with equipment to protect staff from COVID infection. So this isn't even like US courts or UK courts or UK based. It's not even the UK government telling us the details of the contract. This is a court in America, specifically in Miami, that we're getting the details from here, which is shambolic in so many ways. This taxpayers' money being wasted. And the only way we're finding out about this with the details is because of an American court. Earlier this year, as the coronavirus pandemic was spreading rapidly around the world, Florida-based jewelry designer Michael Sager set up a business to supply PPE to governments. So this guy, despite us having PPE within the country that was ready to buy from UK warehouses, we chose to go with a lot of dodgy people, including this guy. So he used his expertise of working with factories in China to land what are described as a number of lucrative contracts supplying protective gloves and gowns to the NHS. Mr. Sager, he does sound like a Capcom villain, signed up a Spanish businessman, Gabriel Gonzalez Anderson, to help with the procurement, logistics, due diligence, product sourcing and quality control of the PPE equipment. In effect, Mr. Anderson was expected to find a manufacturer for the deals that have already been done. So basically what the situation is here, that the government has signed a contract using a middleman to get PPE from this guy, Mr. Sager, and the Sager, after receiving the money, has gone to his boy Mr. Anderson to go find a supply for the PPE. So this is such a ineffective system and really dodgy because in effect this guy Mr. Sager, he might not have been able to find the PPE depending on how competent Mr. Anderson was. So it's very confusing, the situation here. But what we can see here is the government basically paid up front or paid money to a company, to a middleman, who then paid another company, who then, once the money was his, tried to find a guy to find a supplier, if that makes any sense. Further £20 million pledged. Mr. Anderson was paid more than £21 million for his work on 2 government contracts to supply the NHS. He was described in court documents to have been done very well under this arrangement. So again, this is a court in Miami. In June, Mr. Sager signed 3 more agreements to supply the NHS with millions of gloves and surgical gowns. When the UK government paid up his go-between, Mr. Anderson would have been in line for a further £20 million in consulting fees. These guys are making tons of money just being middlemen. They're making tons of money being middlemen. But the court documents allege that once the agreements had been signed, Mr. Anderson stopped doing any work for Mr. Sager, and it's not clear whether Mr. Anderson received any of the money for the second batch of deals. So what it looks like here is Mr. Anderson, who is the guy who's meant to find the actual physical suppliers, was not paid by Mr. Sager, allegedly. And what that means is Mr. Sager didn't get the stuff that he had promised in the contracts. So this led to PPE deliveries being delayed to the NHS frontline workers. Mr. Sager claims the company is scrambling to fulfill the contracts by other means. And so what this is the government either being incompetent or corrupt. I don't know which one in this case, because we don't know what kind of links Mr. Sager has to the British government. So in this case, we could say it's more incompetency, if we're being generous. What's happened here is Mr. Sager can't fulfill the contracts. And whether that's because he's fallen out with Mr. Anderson or Mr. Anderson's not very good at his job, but what we can tell from this is they haven't fulfilled the contracts, and that caused PPE problems in the NHS, and that's just grossly incompetent, negligent from the government. So the UK Department of Health and Social Care (DHSC) has published contracts with Mr. Sager's company, Sager LLC, totaling more than £200 million. These were awarded without being open to competition. So what that means is no one else could have bid for these contracts. And so what that means is the government that talks about, how great capitalism and free markets are doing crony capitalism because they're giving money to specific people, whether that's their mates or otherwise, who knows. It's very possible that the first guy mentioned, the middleman. Where is he? The middleman was, he knows someone in the government. Who knows at this point? It's very hard to keep up with this. That's a picture of Mr. Sega up there. He doesn't. Well, I guess maybe he looks like a villain, and he could be a Resident Evil villain. The nice guy who turns out to be a zombie. Who knows? It's very dodgy what's going on. This story is a bit difficult to follow. I'm not gonna lie, because there's so many names here. But what we can tell is this guy here, Sega, was paid as a middleman. Sega was paid to get the PPE. So Sega then paid the other guy, Anderson, to find the PPE. Anderson obviously is unable to do it, or something else is going on here, and the government have wasted taxpayer money here. Huge profits. Alongside the legal dispute in Florida, the deals are set to be challenged in the UK courts by campaigning group Good Law Project. We'll talk about them in a second. It accuses government ministers of not paying sufficient regard to taxpayers' money over a contract with the firm. We do not understand why. As late as June, the government was still making direct awards of contracts sufficiently lucrative as to enable these sorts of profits to be made. Julian Munkham has said, and he is worth a follow on Twitter. I'll leave his Twitter in the description. He's well worth a follow. This is not the first time concerns have been raised about PPE contracts. The DHSC signed during the first wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Earlier this year, the BBC revealed 50 million masks the government brought could not be used in the NHS because of safety concerns. And last week, it exposed concerns that the government had leaned on safety officials to certify PPE. That's a separate story we'll talk about once I get the chance. Which had been wrongly classified. The DHSC was contacted for comment but did not respond in time for the publication. So most likely they're not going to come back to us, the public. And your local MP, if you're a Conservative MP especially, you should be asking questions. Ask him. Sega LLC said, at the height of the pandemic and at a time when the NHS was in need of high quality PPE, we met required safety standards. We delivered for Britain on time and at value, which is a myth. We have few full-time staff, so for large projects we bring in short-term contractors for additional expertise and capacity, allowing us to deliver what is needed. And the thing is, right, why are we going to a company with such few staff that brings in short-term contractors? Clearly they're not experts in the field. So why are we going to this company run by Sega? We are exceptionally proud to have played a part in... I'm not going to read any more of that because this guy's a fraud. This guy's an absolute fraud, Mr. Sega. So here we go on to what the Good Law Project is talking about here. So almost $50 million to one man not to supply PPE because he didn't, but to act as a middleman to sort the logistics from the jeweller from Florida for whom the UK government selected to supply £250 million worth of PPE. So the Florida jeweller called Michael Sager, and we can't tell you the total he earned from those 250 million contracts. Inexplicably, the government has blanked out those numbers, but he boasts of having secured lucrative contracts with the government of the United Kingdom. So who he's told this to, who knows? But what we can tell from this is he's made a lot of money from this. And he doesn't stop there. The particular contract award we are challenging entered onto the 4th of June, which is towards the end of the first wave, for £70.5 million worth of gowns, of which a little over £16 million went to middlemen. Was for 10.2 million gowns, which is approximately the entire number of gowns consumed by the NHS in England from the start of the pandemic until early November. And the price was paid. The price we paid the jeweller, £6.91, was £2.31 above market price we paid others. So what's going on here is that we're paying this company a lot more than we paid other companies to supply us with PPE, which is scandalous in its own right, and it raises more questions about why this company were given so much money. For those gowns during the pandemic, suggested if those others made a 10% profit, a profit for the jeweller of £28 million before he paid the middleman. So this guy here making a lot more money, per unit and overall compared to what the other suppliers had got. And it does raise a lot of questions here, especially because the contract that the jeweller was given, Sega, was a no bid contract. So what that means is there was no other competition. So Sega could name a price, and because there's no other bidders, the government would argue that they were forced to go with Sega when the government should have opened this to be open tender, especially because they put this contract out in June, and June was towards the end of the first wave. So the cosy arrangement between Sega and the middleman didn't last long. According to documents, and in an ongoing court battle, the middleman stopped performing, and we lost out. there were delays in delivering PPE. So what that means is maybe the middleman didn't pay, Sega didn't pay Mr. Anderson. That's what it looks like. But our focus isn't on the individuals who made profits from the pandemic. If the government is handing out free money, who could blame them for joining the queue? And that's true, to be fair. They gained the system, but it was our government that gave them this contract. Our focus is on the government which let them, absolutely. What were the reasons for deciding to award this contract to a jeweler specialist over other suppliers? Why did they pay over the odds for PPE? What steps did they take to satisfy themselves that Sega was up to delivering the job on such a high order of PPE? Did they check the reliability of the subcontractor? That's Mr. Anderson. If the answers aren't good enough, it's hard to imagine they could be. We will sue. And so it's very likely that this company will sue, this group, the Good Law Project. Will sue, and you can donate. They're miles short of their target. There's a long way to go until the 17th of December, so if you want to donate, I'll leave this page in the description as well. And so what we can learn from this is the government paid out massive amounts of money to certain companies like this who the government paid over the odds for in no bid contracts, and they could have potentially broken UK law by doing this. I wouldn't be surprised if it broke EU laws as well over things like this. But the government are going to argue as an emergency. But the thing is, in June, the COVID numbers weren't as bad. If we quickly just jump over, and if we actually look at June, so there's the United Kingdom, the dark blue line. If you look at June, this was when the first wave was ending. So why did they pay this guy so much money in June for this contract? Why did they give this guy so much money in June to do this? Especially because the pandemic was towards the end. Look, May, June. These are cases. New cases that were popping up in June. You can see the numbers were falling dramatically, and so it's very confusing about why this happened. But is this incompetence or corruption? I'll let you debate that in the comments because I'm not sure anymore. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.